Thank you. My name is Rocco Pierce, and I think I've told this story before, but my dad was a boxing fan, and he was in Alaska on a remote site when I was born, and so my mother and grandmother couldn't contact him when I was born, so they decided to name me something they thought he would like, and he was a boxing fan, and Rocky Marciano was the heavyweight champion of the world, and so anyway, I got Rocky Marciano's moniker. But that served me well over the years. When we moved to Florida and I entered the school before my first day of class, I was running down the hallway and somebody designed the rental house we were in where the doors opened up into the hallway, and I was running down, my sister opened the door and bang, I had this black eye, a crew-cut haircut, my name was Rocco. We got there just before Christmas, and the bully of this classroom, I'm not kid you not, he was the bully, he bought me a Christmas present. And so, anyway, it served me well over the years, and Debbie and I have been in the Pacific now since 2003. That is, we've been working, and you've been with us nearly that whole time. You came on board pretty early in our work, and we appreciate your work. In fact, what I want to say to you is, this is not my work, or this is not mine and Debbie's work, this is our work. And without you, and without congregations like you, the work in the Pacific that we're doing would not be possible. And so the things that you're going to see are a result of our work together, and we do appreciate that. We also appreciate you sending Andy and Derek out a couple of years ago to be with us and help us with the school, and so we'll talk a little bit more about the school in just a moment. Let's see if that's going to work. Let's see. Got it. It's on. There it goes. All right, very good. Thank you, Derek. All he had to do was stand up and lay hands on it. Actually, he did it from afar. But anyway, the passage I'd like you to consider is it's very scriptural for us to spend time together reporting. When Paul and Barnabas went on their first missionary journey, what did they do? Well, they spent, a couple of years, 3 years, going around and preaching and establishing churches, and then they came back to Antioch for what purpose? It says, from there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had completed. Now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, so they stayed there a long time with the disciples. And so again, you see that it's very scriptural for us to report on our work together. And so it's important that you realize what has been accomplished by your input in the work that we're doing. Going the wrong way. All right, there we go. This is basically the teachers for the school. I was the director and one of the instructors. Jason was the academic dean and one of the instructors, and then Amosi was one of the full-time instructors. And then we've had short course teachers like Derek and Andy that have come out and taught classes for us. And so again, we've had short course teachers from all over. And of course, your preacher, Gary, has been out and taught in our school too. And so it's been very helpful to have you send these guys out. So again, we have a large staff that we've used over the years. When we started BIR, that is the Bible Institute at Rewanga is the first church of Christ in the Pacific. Actually, that's not true. I found doing some research that McGarvey had a hand in sending missionary out to the Northern Island, and there was a congregation of the Lord's Church for a period of time in the 1800s. But that was not meeting in the 1950s when they began sending correspondence courses from New Zealand and up into Fiji, and then from that they sent some guys up there to baptize, and then eventually the first missionary settled there in the early 60s, and he's the one that established the church in Rewanga, and that's been meeting there for over 50 years now. And so again, that's the oldest church, and they're the ones that sponsored us to come in for the school, and so that's where it started. But anyway, we had some goals that we set for BIR when we came into the Pacific, and first of all, we wanted to train preachers, teachers, and church leaders, and we'll talk about some of the goals being achieved in that. Secondly, we wanted to train others. We wanted them to train others to be preachers, teachers, and church leaders. And then third, we wanted them to translate existing religious works into the native dialect, and then our fourth goal was author original religious works, either in English or their native dialects. And so again, we'll talk about some of how we've achieved, I keep hitting the wrong button, how we've achieved some of those goals. We started out teaching classes. Now, it went back before that. We had about a 2-year period, or about a 1.5-year period, where we were actually going around and getting people on board with the work. And I also made trips out there, a couple of trips out there, to make sure that the people in the Fiji Islands were okay with it, that they wanted this work, and that they were interested in us doing this. And so again, all that took some time, but our first classes started in 2016, and then our first graduating class was in 2018, and then we graduated 6 more classes. I'm sorry, I can't see. 6 more classes from 2019 to 2024. Graduates are in Fiji, the Solomon Islands, Ponape, and Samoa. We have had 2 programs of study. Our primary program was a full-time program that ran from Tuesday to Friday, year-round. Actually, not year-round. We go to November. Their summer's opposite of here, and so their summer break is from November till the end of January. And in fact, to give you an idea, when Debbie and I were out there, we were out there during what was considered to be the winter, and it was a particularly hot day for winter, and one of the ladies turned to Debbie and said, "Oh, it's so hot today, it feels like Christmas." So again, it's hot that time of year. So again, that's when we had our school break, because that's when the local institutions had their school break, and so we'd come back and report during that time. But anyway, the full-time program was a 48-class program. It was comparable to a preacher training school here in the U.S. In fact, we patterned it after. We approached several preacher training schools, and we looked at their curriculum and everything, and then we also were partnering with Bear Valley, and we looked at their program, and again, that was the basis of ours. And these 48 classes were 30-hour classes. So again, it was comparable to the same kind of program you get here in the U.S. We also then started a nighttime leadership training program about 2019 with Mosi directing it. And this was for those that could not attend the full-time program that were working. And so it was a 12-class, 30-hour program. And we were able to graduate some students out of it. And so those are the 2 main classes. And then we started one just before COVID in the West, because we had an interest in the West, and so we were going over to Nandi in the West, and we're teaching classes on Saturday, so we went all day Saturday in the classes over there. But anyway, to give you an idea of some of the success of our program, again, we wanted to train preachers and church leaders. Romulus came to us as an experienced preacher, and then he was converted to the church when we had some relief effort from a cyclone back in 2016. He was about 2016, I guess it was. He was converted about that time, and so he was working for a resort, and so we approached him about being a student in 2022, I guess it was, about being a student in the program, and he dropped his work, and he came on over, he and his wife, and was involved in the program. So he'd been preaching for a while. Anyway, when he came over, he took the program, and then he went back and was preaching, and he was invited back over by Rewanga. He was on a northern island, which you had to fly to get to. But anyway, he came back because he was invited to speak at Rewanga. He pulled Jason aside one day, and he said, "You know, Jason," he says, "I have a bone to pick with you." He said, "Before I took the classes," he says, "I could put together a sermon in 3 hours." And he says, "Now it takes me 3 or 4 days." Now, again, that's supposed to be funny. And again, if you're a preacher, you understand the difference. But again, he said, he went on to explain this. He said, before, he said, I'd come up with what I wanted to tell the people, and then I'd go to the Bible, and I'd pull out scriptures that kind of went along with what I wanted to say. He says, now, I realize that the Bible needs to be the guide for the message. And so he spends his time understanding the Bible, and then from that, he draws his message to teach. That's the reason it takes him so much longer. I remember an elder approaching me one time. He says, it takes us a long time to get together a lesson, but he says, you've been to school, so you don't have to study. And I thought, man, that's wrong. But the point is, a lot of people don't understand education doesn't make you know everything. Education just gives you the tools necessary to put together the lessons. And so again, that's what we're trying to do, is give them the tools so that they can write their own lessons from the Bible text. And so that's what we've been doing. So again, the level of preaching has elevated. When we first started going into the Pacific, it was not uncommon for one of the local members to say, you know, they've asked me to preach on this subject. Do you have a lesson on this subject? And basically that's what they were doing. They were going to me and other people that they knew from the U.S., and they were getting lessons on different subjects, and so they were just basically warming over lessons that were preached by somebody else. Now, we've seen a rise in the level of their sermons. In other words, they are writing their own original sermons, and again, the enthusiasm level of their preaching has increased dramatically. And not only are they writing their own sermons, they have been working with people that haven't been to the school, and they're learning from them how to do it themselves. And so again, it's passing from one to the other. Another thing is we wanted church leaders. And so one of the things that's happened, Raironga was in Fiji for 50 years before they appointed their first elders. Their two elders they appointed were graduates of our school. In other words, the first two. And so again, they've done a fantastic job. In fact, they were put in just before the COVID lockdowns. And if it hadn't been for those elders being put in, I don't know if the church would still be there in Raironga, or it wouldn't be where it's at. But they were able to hold it together. We couldn't meet in the Raironga building during that time period because of government regulations. But what they did was they started doing Facebook sermons. So they would call every day, the members, and so they kept in touch. And so the church did very well during COVID and maintained its identity. Now, this up here is a congregation in Nayla, and they had elders in the past, but one of them had gotten sick or something. But anyway, the elders had disbanded. But anyway, they appointed elders just recently again, and two of the four that they put in were graduates of the school, and another one was a student in the school, and the third one wasn't associated with the school. But again, it's having an impact. Another congregation up in Dela Damanu, one of the congregations, Mavono, as soon as he graduated from the program, they already had elders there, but as soon as he graduated, they appointed him as an elder there. So he's an elder and also the local evangelist. And so again, the church, the school has had an impact in the leadership in the Pacific. Here is Samuela, and Samuela is a very energetic, high-energy guy. He was the Colin Powell of the military for a while. He was head of the whole military. And we didn't know this until we did a campaign in the West. We took the students from Suva over to a 4-hour drive over to Nandi, and we had a campaign with a local church over there. And they were knocking doors, and so he was out with some of our students, and he says, let's go by the military base. And I said, military base? He said, yeah, let's go by the military base. And so they were all surprised, and so he drives on the military base, and when he goes into the conference with all their, head guys, all the brass, they come in, and they gave him the chief seat, and they sat down. That's when they knew that he had some pull. And so again, Mavono is an interesting fellow. He was actually an Olympian, and he barely missed the podium in the Olympics back in his day. I don't remember how far back that was. I think it was when it was in Japan. But anyway, he's an interesting fellow. And anyway, he got together with the elders at Raironga, and he says, we need to be teaching this to our local young people. And he says, we need a class on how to do a sermon outline. And so he got them together, and they got motivated, and so they started teaching a class, an 8-week class. And it wasn't just a simple outlining class, A, B, C, D. They had to do 4 sermon outlines, and they had to preach them during class. And they had to do a topical outline, which most of them, were familiar with. They then had to do a textual outline, and that's where the topic and the text the topic and the main points come from the text. And then they had to do an expository, where it all comes from the same passage, and then they had to do a narrative where it's either about a person, a character in the Bible, or a story in the Bible. And so they had to preach all 4 of those, and many of the young people that took the class were then asked to preach the same lessons. They had to preach them in class, and then they were asked to preach the same lessons at some of their local congregations. So again, he initiated that, and so again, he's one of our graduates, a real go-getter. This is Mavono up here. I talked a little bit about him. And Mavono has always been very evangelistic, but since he's been through the school, he's been kind of on fire. And while Debbie and I were flying back to the U.S., because she was scheduled for surgery and we needed to report, when we were flying back to the U.S., he was actually leading a group of members of the church, not from the U.S., members of the church locally, to Raki, and they were having a campaign up in Raki, and he initiated this, and they baptized some, and one of the guys they baptized, this guy right here, when he came up out of the water, he says, I've got some land, I want to donate land for a church building. And so again, here they are taking it. Romulus, extremely evangelistic. He's doing a lot of good work up in Vatndammu, which is the northern island, and he's just doing a fantastic job. And Amosi has been evangelistic since I've known him. He and his wife have been involved in baptizing people, and since he's been through the school, he's even doing more. But one of the things he's initiated is they have one Saturday a month that they do walking, and he's trying to get people to have exercise so they don't have health issues. But while they're out walking, he hands them tracts, and they pass out tracts while they're walking one Saturday a month. And so again, then he and his wife are baptizing people every so often. And so again, he's extremely evangelistic, and he was one of the teachers at the school. He's also an elder. Now, here's the class I was talking about, Empowering Faithful Men to Train Others in the South Pacific. And so this is the class that I was telling you that was initiated by Samuela and by Mosi and Lacio, two graduates in the program. And here it is again. These three graduates taught this 8-week course. They had 10 to graduate from the program, and so from that Saturday class. Here is John Nakambeya, and he came into the program because of a rental thing. You know, sometimes when something happens bad, you think, well, this is bad. You remember the old thing, you know, it was bad, no, it was good, you know, and that sort of thing. Well, this is kind of the way it was with this situation. We rented a brand new van to take the students over to Nandi. The largest Hindu temple in the South Pacific is in Nandi, Fiji, and we were teaching a class on world religions, and I wanted to expose them to the Indian population because, again, the Indians and the the Fijians don't really have much to do with each other. They're separated culturally and all this. And again, about 35% of the population is Indian. And so you have this big place that needs to be evangelized. And right now, most of the work we've done in the Pacific has been with the indigenous population. And so I want to expose them to that culturally so that they are not afraid to them. One of the things we found out from our trip over there, by the way, is that the Brahman is their head god, and they believe he's the creator god, and that the 3 million other gods that they worship are just manifestations of the one God, Brahma. And so again, they do believe in a one creator God. So again, but anyway, back to my story. We had planned this trip for the students over to take the tour of the Hindu temple, and I rented this brand new van to take them over in. I went to pick up the van, and the guy says, he says, it's a bad story. He says, we rented the van out yesterday, and they crashed it, so it's not working. But he says, we do have another van, and they gave me this old beat-up van, and I drove it to my house, and when I got to my house, I couldn't put it in reverse, and so it was stuck. And I thought, well, how are we going to get all these students over to the west? And so John Nakambeya had been laid off from his job. His wife works for the customs. And so anyway, he was home. And so I called him up. I knew they had a van. I said, hey, John, would you be willing to drive us over to Nandi on this tour? And we were going to stay at the church building in Nandi that night. And he says, yeah, I'd love to. And so anyway, so he came over and picked us all up, and we went over. On the way over, our students were going over their Greek vocabulary. And so he got in on it, and he was quoting the Greek vocabulary with them and everything, and so he got kind of excited about that. We did the tour of the temple, and we came back. He says, can I sit in on the classes? And I said, sure, you can sit in on the classes. And so again, he started sitting in on the class on world religions, and he was 2 weeks into the class on Greek, and so he wanted to take the Greek class as well. And 2 weeks into the Greek class, in other words, he's 2 weeks behind everybody else, but he finished middle of the pack. I think if he'd started with the class, he would have probably been the top student. He has a really sharp mind. Anyway, we had one guy come out from Texas and taught a class for us on writing, and he was published in the Power for Today magazine here in the U.S. And so again, he's got a real sharp mind. But now, when I first met him, he just, in fact, the first Sunday we were there, he had just been baptized maybe the week before we were there, or maybe the Sunday we were there. But anyway, and so he was a very young Christian. His wife grew up in the church, but he did not. And the first time when we came back in, the first time they asked him to lead a prayer, he went down like this. And nobody could hear anything he said, and we were sitting right on the front row, and we couldn't hear what he said. Now, he's preaching and teaching and very involved in the work, and he, like I said, he's got one of the sharpest minds of any of the students that we've had, and so he is doing very well. In fact, he got more involved during COVID when his family couldn't meet at church. That's when he started getting more involved in teaching and preaching. And so again, and then he came into the school and graduated. He was our last graduate. Anyway, here is the guy that I've known probably the longest in Fiji, John Cora, and he's come over. He and some of the students, some of the members from the Nandi area drove over and took their vacation time to take a class on outlining. And that's when we started going over to the West and teaching the Saturday class. And so John took some of those classes. But John has written tracts in the Fijian language, and we helped him publish those for distribution. So again, that's some of the things that we're seeing. Now, a bit of nostalgia or sadness here, I might say. We began with an 8 to 10 year commitment, and so the full-time program, we've had to draw it to a close. There's a couple of reasons for that. In April of 2025, we'll have been in Fiji for 8.5 years. We've been working in Fiji longer than that, but living there 8.5 years. Two things happened. The reason we closed down the full-time program. Number one, we ran through the local population that could attend full-time. When we first went into Fiji, they had a mandatory retirement for government workers at 50 years of old. And so people were retired. And so most of our students in the program were older. They weren't, high school graduates. And so again, in fact, the youngest student I think we had in the program was, no, we've had a couple of young girls that took it, but the youngest preacher student was 26 years of age when he started the program. So again, we've had mostly older ones. But again, we've run through those that are retired and those that can, give up and come and live and take the program. The second thing that happened was COVID happened, and there was a change in government about the same time COVID happened, and it made it practically impossible. Not actually. I mean, if you had millions of dollars, you could make it happen, but practically it became impossible for us to bring in students from outside. And so we ended up shutting down that particular program because it was too expensive to maintain the campus with no students. One of the things that came out of that, let me go back. There it is. The library. We had a significant library that was donated, and we didn't know what to do with the library. And so Rewanga said, hey, we'll take the library. In fact, I told him, well, if you're going to take the library, it needs to be air conditioned because in the tropics it would dissolve very fast. It would deteriorate. So they put an air conditioner in the upstairs. They're in the process of doing some remodeling work, and so we were able to put the library with them. Lacio's wife, Lacio is one of the elders there. Lacio graduated, and his wife graduated from the program. She was our librarian for the last few years, and she's the one that did the card catalog index for our library, so she's very familiar with it. And so they'll take good care of it, and they'll make it available to our graduates and also to any others that are wanting to come and do some research for sermons. So that's where our library ended up from the full-time program. Now, we're not ready to retire, and there's still a need to train preachers in the Pacific. When we started out originally, and we talked to you about Fiji being a central located place where you can come in and bring students in from outside, we were able to bring in students from other countries at that time. But because of COVID and because of a change in the attitude in the local government, it became more and more difficult for us to bring in students from outside. The last set of students we tried to bring in from the outside, it was going to cost us $20,000 one way just to get them to the island. $20,000 one way. And so, and then another issue was they were going to have to hop on so many different islands and go such an erratic route. They came from an island of less than 10,000, island nation of less than 10,000 people, and they never traveled before. We figured if we put them on a plane, we'd never see them again. And so, again, we decided it was impractical to bring them in. And so that's when we began to look at what can we do? There's still people out there in the Pacific. Well, Acts 15:36, sorry about that. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they're doing. Now notice, Paul had one phase of his missionary work, and then when he got to that end of that phase, they took a time to report, and then what did they do? They planned another missionary journey out, and they went further out. And so that's what we're in. We're not giving up the need to train preachers in the Pacific. But one of the interesting things that's happened, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, I won't get ahead of the game. So they returned. We plan to implement a leadership training program in the local church in Fiji. And so what we're doing is we're turning the classes over to the local graduates, and they're going to start teaching in their local villages. And so Jason and I are in the process right now developing an 18-course curriculum, and it'll take 12 courses to graduate from this Saturday or night program they'll implement in our villages. And so it'll be a 12 30-hour program that they'll take. And we'll give them the curriculum and the PowerPoints and the workbooks that they need to implement this in their own villages. And so again, we've already started working on that. So we'll have 18 courses that we'll be able to give to them. And of those 18 courses, 8 will be core courses that will be required for graduation. Then I'll have 4 electives from the remaining 18 courses that they can choose from, and the local teacher can help decide what they'll teach. And so again, that's what we're implementing right now. And again, like I said, they're ahead of the game. They already started teaching the class on sermon outlining. So again, that's what we're working on right now. And so Debbie and I plan on returning to Fiji in the end of January, and I'll help Jason implement that. And then Jason is coming back mid-April, and he'll be the missionary in residence at Freed-Hardeman in the fall of 2025. But I'm going to continue. I have to come back. Debbie has a medical procedure, and then I'll go back in, and we'll close everything out as far as living in Fiji. Jason's work permit ends at the end of April. Mine ends at the end of June, and so I've got a little bit more time where I can go back in and do some work to finish setting these schools up. So that's one of the things we plan on doing. But then there remains a need to train preachers in the remote, far-flung islands of the Pacific. Now, this is the greatest shortage I see in the brotherhood-wide, but it's especially true in the Pacific. You baptize somebody on an outer island, what do you do with them? How do you ground them in the faith? Now look at that globe. What do you see? What's the main color you see? Water. And that's what it looks like if you're in space. So that's the greatest area in the world, is that Pacific Island. There are 14 countries, 10,000 islands, inhabited islands, more than that. 31 million people, 12 time zones in what you see right there. So how do you reach that many people? You can't put a missionary on every island. I guess you could. Again, money were no object. You could put a missionary on every island, but it'd be very difficult. The Bible says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And so that's the first half, and we do a pretty good job of that. But then the second half is equally as important. Then we're to teach them to observe everything God has commanded. So how do you ground those new babes into Christ? And so you need people that are trained to be able to teach them. And so this is still a challenge in the Pacific. I have baptized people on a remote island, left 1 or 2 Christians on an island, and left them there. And when I did, it's like leaving a baby on the doorstep. You know, what do you do with them? And so it's one of the reasons we wanted to work on this training program. But how do we meet this challenge? What is the solution to training men, leadership over hundreds of miles of open ocean, sometimes thousands of miles? I believe the answer is a virtual classroom. Now, 10 years ago, the technology wasn't there in the Pacific to do this. It was in other rural parts. When I first went into Vanuatu, I'd go out to an island called Ambai, Vanuatu, and I was out in the bush. I was out in the jungle. I took a bath in the creek. That's where I bathed every day. I slept in a bamboo hut and had to fight the bed bugs. But anyway, slept in a bamboo hut. We didn't have electricity, and I was out there, and if I had to died out there or got swallowed by a shark, Debbie had never known what happened to me because there was no contact with the outside world. But you can go in there today, and they'll have a cell phone hooked on their ear, and so it has improved tremendously. And even where they don't have electricity, they have solar chargers, and some of the ones that have solar chargers will charge the ones that don't have solar chargers to charge their phone, and that's how they make a little extra cash. And so again, it's now become possible. And then Elon Musk, whether you like him or hate him, he has put the StarNet up, and so now it's capable to get inexpensive internet anywhere in the Pacific. So again, the tools are there to do this that wasn't there even 10 years ago. And so that's one of the things I want us to consider. So I'm proposing that we establish the Virtual Preacher Training Institute in the Pacific Islands. Again, they may not have indoor plumbing. They may not even have a conventional house as you know it, but they will have a cell phone. And so again, this makes it possible. And again, the technology has shifted. When I first went in, they had the flip phones and those kinds of phones. Now they have the smartphones out in these areas. And you can get a smartphone in Fiji, a smartphone, for around 150 Fiji dollars. That's $75 US. Now that's not an iPhone, but it's still a smartphone, and it's able to do smartphone technology. So it's within range of them. Again, the Pacific Ocean is the largest area on the face of the earth, and people are isolated. Sometimes your nearest neighbor can be 800 or 1,000 miles away. And so again, how do you train people in these remote regions of the Pacific? Here are the time zones, and you can see how it's cut up. And again, that red line is the international date line. Again, when Debbie and I fly out of the U.S., fly out of Fiji back to the U.S., we go back a day. We actually land in Los Angeles before we left Fiji, if you can figure that out. But anyway, so you got people separated by the international date line. The reason it's all crooked like that is Kiribati didn't want their population, they're the largest expand, in other words, they expand the largest part of the Pacific, and they didn't want their nation to be separated by a day of the week, and so that's the reason it's cut out like that hammer there. And then Western Samoa decided they wanted to be with New Zealand, so now they are the furthest out, and you can be in American Samoa, and it's a day different in Western Samoa. And so again, that's the way it is. So again, you got 12 time zones. Practically speaking, we would be working probably 10 of those, 8 to 10 of those time zones. So if we had a class in the U.S. from 12 o'clock, from 5 o'clock in the evening to 9 o'clock at night. In other words, I was teaching a 4-hour class, 2 days a week. That would give them 32 hours in a month for one course, so they could complete a course every month. And so if I did that from 5 to 9 here in the U.S., it would be 12 to 4 in American Samoa. It'd be 1 to 5 in the Christmas Islands. And then you'd add a day to it, or you'd take a day away from it, and you'd have 12 to 4 p.m. in Western Samoa. You'd have 11 to 3 p.m. in the Marshall Islands. You'd have 10 to 2 in the Solomon Islands, 9 to 1. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. You'd add a day. But anyway, 9 to 1 in Papua New Guinea, and then 8 to 12 in Palau. So it would be possible then to teach a class in the U.S. and have students sit in it 2 days a week. They would get 32 hours. So again, that's what we're looking at implementing. So would be a potential outline. We'll have to work some kinks out, but this is what we're looking at doing. So January would be a break day because that's the middle of summer for them, or towards the end of summer, but we'd do a class in February, a 32-hour class in February, a 32-hour class in March. And then in April and also August, we would take trips out into the Pacific to teach short courses, so they'd see us face to face. So that'd be one of the 8 classes they'd have to take. and so, or one of the 24 classes that they have to take. And then in May, we'd have another short course. June, July, September, and October, we'd have short courses. That's 7, not short courses, 7 virtual classes, and then we'd have 1 live class every year. And so that would be how we would be able to teach them. And so in 3 years, they would be able to graduate with a 24-hour class in training. So again, and then I was talking to Andy about this. One of the things we'd like to do then is, as we get graduates from that program, maybe implement a graduate program beyond that where they could get even more, like we would teach Greek and some of those other classes that wouldn't be practiced initially until they had some background. Anyway, here are some of the classes that we're proposing to teach, some of the 24 classes. And there's the new, there's actually, we'd have Old Testament classes, New Testament classes, ministry classes, and then we'd have religious studies classes like hermeneutics and world religions and denominational doctrines, those sort of things. Now, am I out of time? Okay, good. I'll wind it up. I'm going to be partnering with Randy English in the Pacific Broadcast Network. They have some of the technology we need to accomplish this, and he's offered us facilities in Gaither Mountain and also in American Samoa that we could broadcast from and continue this teaching while we can travel back and forth. Debbie has some health issues that require her to be in a doctor's office a couple of times a year, and so we won't be able to live out there year-round, but we will have to come back periodically for that, and so that's something that will be going on. Another thing that I've been asked to be involved in is this kind of program has already been going on in the Jamaica for a while now. They were ahead of us technologically wise in Jamaica over what we are in the U.S. I mean, what we are in the Pacific, and so they've been, the Jamaica School of Preaching has been training preachers for 50 years. And they have gone 15, maybe 20 years ago, they've gone to a virtual program so that they can reach out because it's been more difficult to bring people into Jamaica. And so they've been going out into Mexico, Cuba, some of the islands in the Caribbean, and even Central America. They've been going out and teaching virtual classes. And so a friend of mine's been teaching that. And so he put me in contact with the director. And they're wanting me to be involved in what they call their extension program, and this is where they are training professionals, people that can't take the full-time program, because they're working during the week, but they want to be involved locally in preaching and teaching in their local congregation. So he's wanting me to be involved in this Saturday program teaching. Right now they have currently 16 students in about 4 or 5 countries that are taking this program. And so they will be there. In other words, they're not coming to the U.S. for training. They want to be there. They want to work with their local congregations. And so I think this would be worth looking into and worth investing time in. So that's another potential part of our work. It wouldn't interfere with our work in the Pacific. But anyway, 1 Corinthians 9, 10 through 11, now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes thanksgiving to us to God. I can't tell you the number of people that came up to me when they knew we were coming back to the U.S. Please tell the people in the U.S. thank you for sending you out here. And they do it all the time. In fact, I still get things via Facebook Messenger from the brother and says, please tell them thank you. Please tell them that you're in their prayers. And so they appreciate what you've done. And again, we could not do this work without your involvement. And again, you've been involved not just financially in our work, you've actually sent workers out into the field to help us on the front lines. And we appreciate what you've done. So again, Banaka Baka Levu, that means thank you very much.